Let's talk about wide receivers that you should start or sit in week 11 of the fantasy football season. A lot of teams are on bye. The Cardinals, Panthers, Giants, and Bucks, which means you will have no Marvin Harrison, Malik Neighbors, Wan'Dale Robinson, Mike Evans. But don't worry, in today's video, I've got you. We're going to help set those lineups. I'm going to go through all 28 teams who are playing this week, 14 matchups in total, starting with Thursday night football, Commanders at Eagles, the battle for the NFC East. Huge implications on the line here. This is tied for the highest over-under of the week. If you guys remember, we actually had last week's Thursday night football game tied for the highest over-under of the week, and that game was very good for fantasy purposes. I'm hoping we had the same thing, and we just keep getting these bangers on Amazon Prime. Now, let's talk about the Commander side of the ball. Terry McLaurin, the guy is a top 5 wide receiver from week 3 onwards. He has been so good for fantasy with Jaden Daniels, everything we wished and dreamed that he could be. It is a tougher matchup against the Eagles. Their defense has turned it around, but I struggle to think of a scenario where most lineups he's not starting. I'm going to label him a must start for me. On the opposite side of the ball, you got guys like A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith. I don't think Marshawn Lattimore is going to play in this game. The obviously Saints cornerback that the Commanders acquired, he is dealing with a hamstring injury. He hasn't made his debut yet. I'm not sure on a short week where he hasn't practiced yet if he's going to make his debut. So that is very good for A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith. A.J. Brown historically has dominated the Commanders. I can think back every year he's been an Eagle. He has been literally manning, all right? Like, you're my son to the Commanders secondary. I think that we could see that again on Thursday Night Football. Got to play A.J. Brown. Devonta Smith, I would also label a must start. I'm a little bit concerned about Devonta Smith. He has a hamstring injury, but this should be a competitive game where he's needed. My only concern is if the Eagles, blow out the Commanders, then Devonta Smith might bust. But the reality is, two good offenses going up against each other. I think this could be a competitive matchup, and it's a high over-under. All right, the second matchup we'll look at here, Packers at Bears. The NFC North, ladies and gentlemen. Start of the 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time slate of games as well. There's no international game or anything like that. No tomfoolery. 41.5 point over-under, which is actually tied for the second lowest over-under of the week. The Packers are favored by 6.5 points. So the Packers are definitely safer plays in this matchup. Jaden Reed, I'm going to go ahead and label a must start. Now, outside of Jaden Reed, who plays primarily in the slot, I am a little bit concerned about the Dobbs, Wicks, the Watson, the guys who play outside, because this secondary is pretty good in Chicago. In fact, if you adjust for schedule, it's actually the worst matchup for your wide receiver in fantasy football. So if you're going to start one of these Packers, I prefer it to be Jaden Reed. Outside of that, the other 3 names could be a complete crapshoot. On the opposite side of the ball, with the Bears, look, here is the positive news. Okay, the positive news is Shane Waldron was fired, the offensive coordinator. He was terrible in Seattle. He was terrible in Chicago. They fired him. Chicago scored 10 points in the first quarter all season. Thomas Brown is expected to take over play calling for the Bears. So at least something is changing. Like, if you own DJ Moore or Adunze or Keenan, at least change is on the way, right? And they have a great schedule in the playoffs as well. Maybe this is a start of something special for them. I would still label them all spot starts because they're all getting targets, and Caleb is not playing up to the prospect that we thought he could be. I still think he'll be fine. But again, I'll label them spot starts. In deep formats, you can play them. In smaller formats, you might have a better option. All right, moving on. Jags at the Lions. 47.5 point over-under, which is tied for the second highest over-under of the week. And the Lions are favored by 12.5 points, guys. The Lions, again, 12.5 point favorites. That is the largest spread of any NFL game this year. Meaning Vegas is more confident. The sports books are more confident that the Lions will win this game than any game this entire year any NFL team has played. And honestly, it makes sense because Trevor Lawrence, uncertain for week 11. Mac Jones, honestly, I thought Mac Jones would be a lot better than he was last week. I thought he was going to be a competent enough backup. He was not. Brian Thomas was awful. Parker Washington didn't get a target. Gabe Davis caught 1 ball. It's a great matchup against the Lions secondary. They're going to have to throw the ball. So Brian Thomas is fine in deeper formats. But as of right now, nothing is going for the Jags wide receivers. On the opposite side of the ball, Amon-Ra St. Brown, of course you're going to start him. Jamison Williams is a spot start. It was good to see him back into the lineup, but he's not going to be someone who ever garners, 8 to 10 targets a game. But I will say, with Sam Laporta's injury If Sam Laporta is held out, I have a lot more confidence in a Jameson Williams. Next, we'll talk about Raiders at Dolphins, 45.5 point over under. The Dolphins are favored by 6.5 points. For the Raiders, it's actually quite simple. Jacoby Myers has been one of the best plays at wide receiver since Devontae Adams went down with that hamstring injury in week 3 and then was traded later to the Jets week 4 or 5, whatever it ended up being. But Jacoby Myers has been one of the better starts at the wide receiver position for a while now. We're going to continue to ride him. I believe that the Raiders are going to be down for most of this game, needing to throw the ball, so that definitely favors a Jacoby Myers. And on the opposite side of the ball, look, I'm still going to label Tyreek Hill a must start, but he's not a top 5, a top 10 play. He's more of a top 20 name. I don't blame you if you think you can't trust him. In smaller formats, if you think you have a better name, I don't blame you. But people who are in 12 and 14 team leagues with start 7, or rather start 9 type of lineups, I think you still need to put him in there. Jalen Waddle could have had an even bigger day if he didn't drop one of those balls. But I'll be honest, like, it doesn't look like rainbows and sunshine for the Miami Dolphins offense. It's really frustrating to watch. I don't understand what's going through Mike McDaniel's head. It's one of the most infuriating offenses to watch, quite frankly. And we have like the Patriots every week looking terrible. We have the Bears every week looking terrible. And I'm still saying the Dolphins is one of the worst offenses to watch because, quite frankly, it just is. It's frustrating to watch. Let's move on to Rams at Patriots, 43.5 point over under. The spread is 5.5 points. Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua. This is everything you wished they could be when you drafted them. Finally, all healthy. There were no reports last week about anyone dealing with an injury or any surprises, coming up midweek. And this is exactly what we hope to see rest of season. Matthew Stafford wheeling and dealing to his boys, and Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua, top 8 plays for me in fantasy this week. On the opposite side of the ball, you do imagine that the Rams are probably going to be up for the majority of this game, meaning Demario Douglas could have some appeal there. As far as Boutte and Polk, I really don't think they're great plays, if I'm honest with you. Sure, you can put them out there and hope for the best, but the reality is right now, between Boutte and Polk, they're kind of starting to split opportunities. Polk is going to get more and more opportunities, I think, as a rookie. All right, let's move on to Browns at Saints, 43.5 point over under. The Saints are favored by 2.5 points. Cedric Tillman, a must start for me. The guy has been one of the best wide receivers in all of fantasy football since Amari Cooper was traded and since Jameis Winston became the starting quarterback. We do know Jameis is going to start again this week. I think you can spot start names like Jerry Jeudy and Elijah Moore, but ultimately the superstar on this team is Cedric Tillman. That's the guy that's going to win your week. On the opposite side of the ball, look, you can chase MVS. I just think you need to be careful about it because MVS had, 3 targets last week? 2 of them were touchdowns. One of them was a long bomb touchdown. I just am not sure how much you can really trust that. It's like Rashid Shaheed, but if Rashid Shaheed was a way worse version of himself, that's kind of what you're putting yourself into right there. Moving on to a huge matchup in the AFC North, Ravens at Steelers, tied for the second highest over-under of the week with 47.5 points. Ravens are actually favored by 3.5 points. And there is a bit of animosity going on here heading into this game. Head coach Mike Tomlin recently was talking about former Steeler Deontay Johnson, and his words, quoted to have said, he's not a lot in their videos. They've got more significant pieces with larger roles to worry about. So, we've already got some shots going back and forth. Obviously, you remember Patrick Queen, once a Raven, now a Steeler. There's a lot of animosity between these two franchises. They've hated each other for a long time, and there's even more on the line now with players returning from former teams and with the division on the line. So this will be a really fun one. I think it should be a very competitive game. Zay Flowers, a must start. I'd be hesitant to play around with Rashad Bateman in this one, just because I think Deontay Johnson, there might be some of that narrative in there where they want to get him more involved, but I did label him a spot start because he's been pretty good this year. But again, I don't think he's going to be your best option. On the opposite side of the ball, George Pickens, Himothy. I've loved George Pickens since he came out of Georgia. We've just been waiting for quarterback play for him, and he is really... It's kind of beautiful what he's turned into the NFL. He's turned into an alpha wide receiver. His route running has improved. I remember all the way back in the Georgia days scouting him coming into the NFL for our Dynasty channel, and I had this quote where I would say, Pablo Picasso was born to paint. George Pickens was born to play football. The guy he just eats, sleeps, breathes football. And if you look at his performances with Russell Wilson, I mean, he's been great. Touchdowns in 2 out of 3 games. over 74 yards or more in every single game. Pickens is a top 10 play for me this week. I mean, the connection is already there, and it's the best matchup in fantasy football against these Ravens, so I think you have to fire him up where you have him. All right, the eighth matchup we'll look at is the Vikings at the Titans. This is the lowest over-under of the week, the only matchup with a projected combined point total under 40 points. The Vikings are favored by 6.5 points, so Justin Jefferson is definitely in play. It might not be a game where Jordan Addison is needed much, but if they get it done in the first half, he could be a flexible name. On the opposite side of the ball, though, Calvin Ridley is one of the better starts in fantasy football this week, facing the Vikings, a top 5 matchup for your wide receivers, and he has been on a roll recently. The Titans have really built their offense around Calvin Ridley pretty in the last 4 or 5 games. All right, moving on. Colts at Jets, 43.5 point over under. The Jets are favored by 3.5 points. Joe Flacco is going to continue to start for this team, so I'm going to continue to play Josh Downs. A top 20 play for me this week. Josh Downs could have had an even better week last week, but he dropped the wide open touchdown. He's a great player. He's not going to do that every week. He's going to make the most of what opportunities he's given. Now, here's the deal. If Pittman is healthy, I'm not sure I want to play him or Mitchell or Pierce, but if Pittman is out with an injury, because he was last week, I think Adonai Mitchell and Alec Pierce both become spot starts, guys that you can throw in there if you're in a desperate situation. It should be a competitive game against the Jets. And then on the opposite side of the ball, it doesn't always work out with the connection, but the targets are there for Garrett Wilson and for Devontae Adams. Both guys I'm going to continue to label a must start. All right, moving on to the 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time slate of games. Falcons at Broncos, 43.5 point over under here. So for the Broncos side of the ball, it's very simple. You continue to start Courtland Sutton, one of our starts of the week last week. We're going to continue to start him this week. The Falcons are a top 10 matchup for your fantasy wide receivers, and he's been great with Bo Nix. On the opposite side of the ball, again, we're going to keep it simple. KISS, keep it simple, stupid. Drake London and Darnell Mooney, both guys are going to go straight into your lineup, and you're not going to think about it. Darnell Mooney is a top 10 wide receiver so far through 10 weeks of the NFL season. You got to feel very good about having him in your lineup. Moving on to an NFC West showdown, Seahawks at 49ers. Here's the good news. DK Metcalf is expected to practice, and by the time you're watching this, he's already practicing, and I bet you he's going to play this week. So I am going to label him a must start. It's a tough matchup against the Niners, but they're going to need to throw the ball. And because DK will be back, I do think it will limit the upside of a Jackson Smith-Njigba. So be very careful starting a name like JSN. He's a fine spot start, but he doesn't have that upside that he's shown previously without DK Metcalf, because ultimately DK Metcalf is their red zone target, and we have to keep that in mind. But it is tied for the highest over-under of the week, so there should be a healthy amount of fantasy points to go around. On the opposite side of the ball, I think you can start all 3 of these 49er wide receivers. Debo's definitely in play. Juwan Jennings was their lead receiver in targets last week. He's been fantastic, one of our favorite pickups off the waiver wire this year. And then Ricky Pearsall is definitely getting enough volume to make a difference as well. All right, moving on to the Chiefs at the Bills. 2 teams that just don't like each other, guys. These teams do not like each other, all right? We've seen the Chiefs send the Bills home plenty of times in the playoffs, but what typically happens is the Bills win in the regular season, and then the Chiefs beat them in the playoffs. That's just what's happened in the last couple of years. Will that continue this year? I don't know, but it is a close spread, 1.5 points in the favor of the Bills. It's a healthy over-under at 45.5 points. DeAndre Hopkins, a must-start for me. Didn't work out last week. In fact, he was on the bus list for me last week, a guy I didn't really want to play, but I feel much better about this matchup, the competitive nature of this matchup. I don't think you can start Xavier Worthy, but what I will say is, if you're into narratives, think about it. The Chiefs traded up with the Bills to get Xavier Worthy. All right, there's been some back and forth throughout the season because of Keon and Xavier's performances. So is there any narrative there? Do they want to get Worthy involved? I don't know, maybe. On the opposite side of the ball, Khalil Shakir is the only one that you can start with any sort of confidence on this team. Keon Coleman has already been ruled out for the week, so that definitely helps Khalil Shakir, and it also helps Amari Cooper if he is to be active. So those guys are definitely playable. I'm not sure I want to chase Curtis Samuel. All right, let's talk about Sunday Night Football. Bengals at Chargers. The Chargers are favored at home. It's a healthy over-under, plenty of points expected. Jamar Chase definitely in play, and T. Higgins, if he plays, we're going to start T. Higgins, okay? When T. Higgins is playing for fantasy football, he's one of the best wide receivers in fantasy football. But the issue is, as of right now, at the time of recording this, he has not practiced. So I would anticipate him not playing, but even if he doesn't play, that doesn't open up another start, in my opinion. I'm not going to chase Jermaine Burton. I'm not going to chase Andre Yeshivas. I'm probably just going to start Mike Gesicki if I can get my hands on him. But still, if Higgins plays, he's in play. If Chase, is out there, he's obviously the wide receiver 1 in fantasy football. On the opposite side of the ball, I do think the Chargers are going to need to throw the ball a little bit more in this one. So Lab McConkey becomes a must start. Quentin Johnson is a spot start, but I wouldn't trust Josh Palmer. Quentin Johnson is really starting to take over that X outside wide receiver role for this team, and Josh Palmer's role is slowly diminishing each and every week, which makes sense. They have investment in Quentin Johnson long term. They don't in Josh Palmer after this deal is done for him. Moving on to Monday Night Football, last game of the week, Texans at Cowboys. Nico Collins will be back. He's expected to practice all week, and he's expected to make his return on Monday. Nico Collins, a wide receiver 2 in my rankings this week. There's not a single league where I wouldn't start him with confidence. Tank Dell is going to take a hit here. He's no longer the number 1 target, but maybe this opens up things for Tank Dell. Maybe because there's less attention on him, he'll be more efficient with the targets that he gets. That is the narrative that you kind of play in your mind. But there's also a scenario, the Texans are favored by 6.5 points, where the Texans don't really need to throw the ball much in the fourth quarter, and it might be more of a Joe Mixon game, but still, I think you could start those names. On the opposite side of the ball, look, I'm going to label CeeDee Lamb a must start, but it's kind of like Tyreek Hill. These are superstar names. We know what they're capable of. In most leagues, you're going to have to play them and lower your expectations, but the reality is we have no idea what their outcome can be on a weekly basis. The Cowboys are coming off a game where they had their lowest passing yards output since 2001. I just don't think it can get much worse than that, okay? So there is a scenario here where CeeDee Lamb busts. If you have a better option out there in my rankings, which you can see in this video, you can play them. Otherwise, you might have to play them and hope for the best. If you have a tough start-sit question that you need help with, check out the pinned comment down below. You can ask us a start-sit question at any time through our website. And if you don't have a free account on Flock Fantasy yet, you can get one by using our promo code LAND, L-A-N-D, at sign up. That gives you the My Team, the trade calculator, and the expert consensus rankings for free when you use our promo code. I appreciate you watching the video. Hit that like button to show some love. Subscribe if you like the content, and I'll see you guys in the next video. All love. Now that those idiots are done talking, who needs some rankings?
Hell yeah, I need some rankings.
Then use promo code LAND, L-A-N-D, for 30% off any membership at flockfantasy.com.
Oh.